Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi, and no matter whether you're headed off to a pre-release this weekend for Bloomburrow, looking forward to your first sealed pool on Arena, or just want to collect this set like a budget boss on Arena, we've got you covered today with all the things you need to know for all of those scenarios, so you head in with a plan. This season, I'm hanging out with the friends here in Bloomburrow, and, well, I don't really look any different. Apparently, I'm always in beast mode. And if you want your Magic the Gathering experience on and off Arena to be in beast mode too, make sure to check out my Patreon page, because, let's be honest, not everything makes it to YouTube. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah. Right. So right up front, let's tackle the big issue that I know is, well, maybe not on everybody's mind, but a lot of people have been talking about it.
Call it the furry set, is that okay? The animal set?
Let's call it the animal set.
The animal set. Bloomburrow, the animal set.
Well, Mark, I'm not sure how well that's going to work out for you, but we'll go with that. Hey guys, as we get started with this budget perspective, let me get you to lean in real close. I got a secret for you. It turns out higher rarity cards are good. Okay, I admit that's not much of a secret. And that's exactly why I'm not going to spend our time talking about all the good rares and mythics. There are plenty of other content creators willing to do that. And since I know that a budget player following our plan is only about 70% likely to have any given rare and only about 50% likely to have any given mythic, with the actual playset statistics going even further down than that very rapidly, I'm just not going to spend our time that way. Instead, I'm gonna turn our magnifying glass towards those commons and uncommons because, you know, those are cards you're going to have, and I want you to be able to get the most bang for your buck. So now that I've set the expectation of not generally talking about higher rarity cards, of course, we're going to talk about a complete cycle of mythic rares, that being the season cycle. These are modal spells, and as you cast them, you are given 5 paw prints worth of modes to choose. Paw prints are a new symbol and resources used so far exclusively for these cards. Now, I've heard it compared a lot to energy, but the fact is, unlike energy, you can't save these and carry them forward into your next season casting. You've got to spend them all. You can't choose to not spend them all, at least that appears to be the case. Now, these are extremely flexible modal spells. Of course, you can only choose the 3 paw print action one time with a total of 5 paw prints, but you could choose the 3-2, you could choose 3-1-1, you could choose 2-2-1, you could choose 2-1-1-1, or of course, you could choose the 1 paw print option 5 separate times. Let's take a look at the white one in a little bit of detail. For 1 paw print, you can create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token. For 2 paw prints, you can exile target non-land permanent, and its controller would draw a card. Or for 3 paw prints, return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield with an indestructible counter on it. When it comes to blue, you have the options to, for 1, draw a card, 2, choose an artifact or creature you control and create a token copy of it, or for 3, return each non-land, non-token permanent to its owner's hand. Within black, you can have each player sacrifice a creature, or you can draw a card for each creature you controlled that died this turn, or lastly, each opponent loses X life, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. With red, you can create a tapped treasure token or exile the top 2 cards of your library, and until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. Or lastly, until the end of your next turn, whenever you cast a spell, Season of the Bull deals 2 damage to up to 1 target creature. And finally, and perhaps least powerfully with green, you can put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, and it gains vigilance and trample until end of turn. Remember, you can do that a total of 5 times if you so choose. Secondly, choose an artifact or enchantment, destroy all permanents of the chosen type, so your opponent's and yours. And lastly, for 3, draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. Could be backbreaking. All in all, I think the seasons look like great new design space. The modal and flexible aspect of them looks really intriguing. I'm sure we're going to see a lot of play out of these. And I particularly like the way the various modes work together to give you a larger overall effect dependent upon the choices that you make with your paw print resources. And we can all expect Bloomburrow to have some class. Well, more specifically, classes. These are cards that work a little bit like sagas, but unlike sagas, which the chapters advance automatically, with a class you need to pay an additional amount of mana at sorcery speed in order to move to the next step. These really haven't been seen since their introduction with the Adventures of the Forgotten Realm set, so these might be new things for many of you. At the time of recording, this hasn't been confirmed by Wizards as of yet, to my knowledge, but the consensus is that we can expect a 5-card cycle at uncommon and then another full cycle at rare. By the time this actually is released, that will probably be either confirmed or disproven by the Bloomburrow spoilers. And we're going to continue our conversation about new mechanics with the Offspring. Yeah, gotta love the background. Anyway, this is an optional added cost as you cast the card because everything is kicker. If you do pay that cost, when the creature ETBs, you create a token copy of the creature that is a 1/1, but copies the creature in every other way, including its mana cost. Now, while Offspring does not technically belong to a particular 2-color pair, or even a particular creature type, as we'll discuss later, you will most often see it around green-white bunnies. The final new archetype for Bloomburrow, which is not archetypal bound, is Gifts. As you cast a spell that has the gift ability, you can promise a gift to an opponent. So this could have some interesting multiplayer applications as well. When a gift is promised, it unlocks an additional or alternative effect of the spell being cast. If the spell fails to resolve for any reason, no gift is actually given. But when the spell resolves, the gift is given prior to any other effects generated by the spell. Now, let's take a look at some examples of the 3 different kind of gifts that are utilized within Bloomburrow. So, starting at the bottom and working our way up, some of the gift spells are going to allow you to promise a food token to your opponent. And in these cases, you should probably expect to get about a half card or even less in value. The reason for that is the food token is generally not a full card's worth of value. Gaining 3 life based on the shock scale is about a mana and a half's worth of value, but they have to pay 2 mana to utilize the food token, so they may come out at a net loss depending upon their situation. Of course, as we'll discuss later, there are some specific archetypes in this format in which life gain matters or food itself can matter. So you're going to have to judge these situationally based on what your opponent is doing. The second type of gift is one of a tapped fish token, a 1/1 creature. And although it does come into play tapped, It is a very real creature that could turn around and attack you, or at the very least be used as a blocker or a sacrificial piece. So you're going to want to expect to get at least a half card's worth of value, but probably not as much as a full card in exchange for that tapped fish token. And the final type of gift is allowing your opponent to draw a whole card. And obviously for this, you want to be getting a whole card's worth of value or more. Otherwise, you just run the risk of falling behind here. That shouldn't necessarily be hard to do, especially when you think about your opponent's deck is probably 40% land. And, well, much less so even bombs and removal, particularly in limited. Probably a good another 40% is more or less filler card. So now that we have the broadest mechanics in the set done, I think it's a good time to talk about the elephant in the set, so to speak. Whether you call it kindred, tribal, or typal, Bloomburrow is bringing a lot of it to a standard environment that already has 6 or more tribal style decks, pretty relevant within its meta. So now is a great time to take stock of your tribally influenced resources. Things like your copies of Roaming Throne, everybody has at least one from the starter decks. Those existing tribal decks that are already in your collection, any copies of Cavern of Souls, everybody should be willing to spend at least one Mythic Wildcard on this. And of course, Bloomburrow's very own 3-Tree City is something we're going to be looking at pretty closely this season. Although we might not expend a wildcard until we've given the season the opportunity to give us one as free-to-play players. The good news is this set has done a lot to make tribal work for you. Starting with, at common, a 10-cycle hybrid 2-color pair sets.
Squirrel!
All of the most relevant creature types. This is really quite extraordinary for the set because each one of these cards can fit into 7 different color pair, making them very valuable in your limited environments and also creating very flexible budget collections. Next up is the Village Land Cycle, available at Uncommon. And each one of these cares about the 4 most prevalent creatures to any given color, and also creates some sort of reward or payoff for creatures of that type. Additionally, each of the villages taps for a key mana symbol. For Rockface Village, for instance, it can tap for a colorless or a red, the red being restricted to spend only on casting a creature spell. For instance, the village also allows you to expend a red and tap the land,
Squirrel!
Giving a target lizard, mouse, otter, or raccoon you control +1/+0 and haste until end of turn. This can only be activated as a sorcery. This is pretty indicative of the kinds of tribal typal boosts that we'll see on all of the villages. You also see here a breakdown of the 4 creatures in each of the 5 colors, and you'll notice that these overlap considerably. We'll go more into that with the individual archetypes in a moment. I am also expecting to see a complete 10-card cycle, 2 in each of the colors at common. A creature that represents 2 of each color's base creatures that we just discussed. For instance, the Life Creed duo is a 1/2 flying bat bird, and whenever another creature you control enters, you gain 1 life. The full 10-card cycle has not been released at this time, but that does appear to be the plan. This, along with the hybrids, gives us a total of 20 very approachable creatures at common. A full quarter of the expected commons of the set are about making your tribal choices work. And as if all of that weren't enough, they gave us a 3-mana 2/3 shapeshifter artifact creature with changeling, meaning it has every creature type simultaneously. It also comes with reach and a 2-mana activated ability to put target card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library, helping to bring back, presumably, other creatures so you have access to them again.
Squirrel!
Clearly, the design team at Wizard of the Coast has decided to make tribal happen. So now let's talk about those 2-color archetypes, and we're going to start with the 3 that have new mechanics associated with them. Starting this portion off in red-green, we have the raccoons and their brand new expend mechanic, which cares about whether you have spent 4 mana in the turn. When you do, that's going to unlock additional effects or abilities on your permanents, future spells, things of that sort. It only triggers once per turn, so you can't do 4 and then do 4 again to double dip. A permanent has to be on the battlefield at the time that you spent the 4 mana so that it can see it happen. Playing an enchantment, for instance, just before the end of your turn to get an end of turn effect will not work if it wasn't there to see the 4 mana being spent. And it doesn't matter what happened to the spell you cast. If it doesn't resolve, it doesn't matter. You spent the 4 mana to cast that spell. And all mana you spend to cast the spell counts. So if, for instance, you pay an additional 2 for the offspring cost, that counts towards your 4 mana.
Squirrel!
No, Doug, that's not a squirrel, but I promise we're going to get to them in just a minute. In red-white, we have the mice, or individual mouse, and its valiant mechanic, which is a little bit reminiscent of several different mechanics over the years. Basically, this is a triggered ability that triggers the first time and only the first time that permanent is the target of a spell that turn. For instance, the Seedglaive Mentor here gets a +1/+1 counter to it when that trigger happens.
Squirrel!
All right, Doug, we are going to talk about squirrels. And hey, Doug isn't the only one that's excited here. The squirrel creature type is one of the most beloved yet underserved traditionally creatures in all of Magic's history. I think there are a ton of people excited to see these not only being printed for the first time in, I think, years, but also to be a viable archetype in Standard. Squirrels, of course, are in the black and green archetype and bring us the new forage mechanic, which allows you to exile 3 cards from your graveyard or sacrifice a food for an additional effect. And now we're going to move through the remaining 7 2-color pair archetypes that have more traditional returning mechanics in a more rapid-fire manner. The blue-white archetype, as it happens, is for the birds, or more specifically flyers. This archetype has a interesting balance between wanting you to have flyers and non-flyers to get full benefit, or in some cases, any benefit at all. Now, how well that archetype ends up balancing out is, well, you guessed it, up in the air. While Standard will have plenty of flyers to pair this with, the Flying Matters package from the Mono Blue Aerial Domination starter deck is just begging to be added to this archetype for a very cheap alchemy deck. And hey, if you like birds, you are going to go absolutely batty for the black-white bat/life matters archetype. It should slide pretty readily into the Standard meta thanks to a couple low rarity bats that, incidentally happen to care or provide life gain triggers. And if you're considering another cheap entry point into alchemy, Pairing this with the Life Matters cards from the mono white Keep the Peace deck should be an easy home run, and believe me, everyone in Historic is absolutely going to love this deck.
There he is! What, behind the rabbit? It is the rabbit. Go on, boys, chop his head off. Right, silly little bidder. One rabbit stew coming right up. Look!
That's right, folks. Rabbits are back with a vengeance, using a green-white go-wide strategy, mostly utilizing tokens. And as I mentioned earlier, although this is not the only place you'll see the offspring mechanic, it is the place you are most likely to see a lot of it. Rats are probably the largest pre-existing of the creature types in Bloomburrow, mostly due to the Wilds of Eldraine set, but this time they're coming around in a blue-black as opposed to the previous red-black archetype. And, well, this time they care about Threshold, which is really just a true-false as to whether you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard. Once you've reached the threshold, it will activate certain static and triggered abilities of various creatures within the archetype. As we move into blue-red, you ought to know that spells matter, don't you think? Now, I believe this archetype is the most likely to positively interact with the corresponding starter deck, but I'm also prepared to be disappointed, as we often are with the Is It Spells Matter deck, because very often they in fact don't. Well, we are almost done with the 2-color archetype pairs, so we better hop to it and bounce back, which is exactly what's going on with the green-blue archetype, built around frogs and blinking creatures, or bouncing them back to your hand so that you can rebuy enters the battlefield or just enters mechanics. And finally, red-black lizards are going to care about whether your opponent lost life during that turn. Alright, so now that we've talked about the majority of the fuzzy-wuzzy creatures of Bloomburrow, there is still one tribe that, well, kind of needs to be addressed. That is the elementals. There are a total of 6 at lower rarity. All are pretty interesting. For instance, the white elemental coyote comes with a exile removal effect. The red boar elemental comes with a veritable Swiss Army knife of keyword abilities, including reach, trample, and haste. And oh, don't ignore the fact that it is base stats of 5/5 for only 5 mana. And, well, all I can say is the 2 green creatures are just absolutely nasty here. Bloomburrow aside, the current standard environment has about 24 lower rarity cards that either are elementals or care about elementals in some way. And, of course, Bloomburrow here is seeding in another 6 at low rarity and another 8 at higher rarities. So I think it may be possible that the Wizards of the Coast development teams are seeding in elementals for some later payoff that we don't know about yet. I'm willing to bet you haven't played Sealed since the last time you played Sealed. So whether you are going to a pre-release weekend or going to be jumping into this on Arena, we've got a primer for you out there for those that need a little bit of a refresher. And Matt would want you to know the link is down in the doobly-doo. Moving into the broad strokes of this set, I'm not necessarily saying that Bloomburrow is going to be the fastest set we've seen over the last year, but it might be. The primary reason for this being that this set has more good 1- and 2-drop plays than any set I can remember, not only over the course of last year, but almost exclusively during the Arena era. So this is really potentially a very fast environment. We probably aren't going to see turn 10 in this by any means whatsoever. Probably not getting above, say, 9.5 on the extreme. But at any rate, there is a lot of aggro that's going to be happening here. There's multiple archetypes that want to be going fast. Which is not to say that mid-range and control styles do not have a place in this environment, but if you are building or running one of those decks, you are going to need to have a plan and answers for your opponent's 1 and 2 drop plays, not to mention the 3 drops. This is not an environment where you are going to be able to coast as a control deck to turn 4 and then expect to stabilize and come out on top. Odds are that in a situation like that, the game is already over on turn 4, you just don't know it yet. Bloomburrow has 0 gold commons. Instead, it has hybridized mana cost. It also has no common dual land cycle, which might feel strange at first, but the reality is most sets actually don't. We've kind of been spoiled by them over the last couple of years a little bit. But I think all of this nets out to, you're going to see the 3 most common deck types. On the 2 extremes, I think seeing a primary color with a splash of a secondary color is something that you're going to see quite a bit. On the other end of the spectrum, seeing a more balanced primary and secondary splashing for a 3rd tertiary color, also very, very real. And as usual, I think the majority of decks are going to be 2 colors, pretty evenly split between the primary and secondary colors. So when it comes to fixing, I think your majority of those pretty evenly split 2 color decks can probably get away with really not needing any fixing. Most of what there is going to be more than enough for those decks that want to splash a 2nd or even 3rd color. For those decks looking to splash, a card like Fountain Port Bell is going to be an important early play. If you don't have anything else to do, using this on turn 1 and setting up for that splash color is a very solid play. It is a little bit of a tempo, as you know your turn 2 draw is going to be a land, but it makes up for that in the fact that you can sacrifice the bell later to draw an additional card and get that tempo back. The 3-tree mascot is another early play for decks looking to splash that is almost indispensable. Not only is this a fairly underwhelming creature in its own right, being a 2-mana 2/1, does have Changeling, so it will support all of your tribal strategies going on, and set you up for that mid-game color fixing by allowing you to shift the color of a single mana once per turn moving forward. And for most of the decks that are looking to splash in this environment, that is going to be what you need. The final piece of colorless common level fixing is Hidden Grotto, a land that does come into play untapped. It allows you to surveil for 1 at ETB, and it does, again, immediately tap for a mana of a colorless sort, or it can be used to shift a single mana's color. That all having been said, I truly believe that Uncharted Haven is just the better common land option, despite the fact that it does come into play tapped. When it does so, you get to choose a color, and it always taps for a mana of that color without the taxation that the Grotto presented. And to wrap up colorless fixing, the 3-mana Patchwork Banner comes down just in time for that all-important mid-game transition. When it ETBs, you pick a creature type, and creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. Additionally, you can tap it for a mana of any color, so it is really perfect for those heavily vested tribal strategies that are looking to do a little bit of splashing. And of course, let's not forget green, which as usual gives us some additional color fixing options at those lower rarities. This time around, both at common. First up, we've got 3 Tree Root Weaver, a 2 mana dork that taps for a mana of any color and has, well, not completely useless 1/3 stats, making it a potential blocker if you are brave enough to do so. Secondly, we've got Heaped Harvest, an artifact food for 3 mana, which might be the best cultivate ever printed, because when it enters or when it's sacrificed, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. That's right, it's cultivate with 2 separate triggers. It does, of course, as a food, have a built-in sacrifice ability to allow you to gain 3 life and force that second land search option. But let's not forget there's plenty of ways to sacrifice an artifact, not to mention food in this format, so using it specifically to gain the life for additional mana isn't always going to be necessary. Now, as nice as these 2 color fixing options are for the set, I don't think this is a set where you can plan on playing greedy green, where you go green as one of your base colors and then just splash all of the really good bombs and removal that happen to be in your pool or your draft or whatever the case may be. I think this set really is going to gravitate more towards a 2 color, and as we've discussed, splashing for a 3rd is certainly going to be an option in many cases, and of course going base green is going to make those scenarios a lot easier, but I just don't think we're going to see much 4 and 5 color green good stuff decks. That's right, friends and neighbors, it's giveaway time here at the Stronghold. Some of you may already know I actually farm multiple accounts to keep me more in touch with what various members of the community are going through as far as their length of time within the arena community, keep me more in touch, etc., etc. That means from time to time I have accounts that I've farmed for multiple years and don't really need anymore. So it has become tradition here at Rotation Time to give away one of those accounts, and this year is no different. This year's giveaway account started way back in 2023 and has done pretty well for itself, accumulating literally hundreds of wild cards, thousands of gems and gold, about 1/3 of all the cards on Arena, and about 20% of a complete Arena playset. Not bad at all for roughly 2 years of free-to-play grinding on the plan. And that's right, this can all be yours. All you gotta do is jump over to Patreon and register as a member at any level. Level of support or free level will have 0 impact on the giveaway. Use the link down in the doobly-doo description below. It'll take you right to the appropriate post, and leave a comment and tell me why I should give the account to you. While you're more than welcome to write anything you want, my suggestion is just keep it positive. Just a couple additional caveats in fine print. First, we agree that this giveaway constitutes no financial exchange to avoid any messy legal taxation issues, whatever. Secondly, any disputes over this giveaway will be arbitrated by my mother, who will almost certainly side with me. And lastly, at a time of my choosing, I will pick whichever comment I like, and I will send that person an email. They will have 24 hours to respond to said email. I will also update the giveaway post to let everyone know that an email has been sent. Once the winner confirms their email, I'll send them all the credentials to this account, and I will forget that it ever existed. good luck, everybody. All right, so what do you say we start the conversation about individual cards with the Arena reprints? First up, we've got Colossification at Rare, and well, this was originally printed on Arena back in Ikoria, so there's going to be a lot of you that this is a brand new card. Next up in reprints, we've got a trio of commons, the only one of which that is currently in standard is Shore Up. Runaway Together is a nice little blue removal. That's a whole different category of removal for those that don't know. And Banishing Light is going to be making a somewhat triumphant return back to standard. And moving right along to a reprint that is bound to be more impactful for us budget players. Of course, we're talking about none other than Fabled Passage at Rare. This card works very much like Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds, but with the added benefit that the land can come into play untapped if you control 4 or more lands. Fabled Passage is one of those highly versatile rare lands that I do very often recommend. For those of you who don't already have copies on this, while I wouldn't rush right out and craft it, certainly by the end of the Bloomburrow season, if you don't have a copy by that time, it probably is at least worth considering a rare wildcard craft for at least one copy. Moving away from reprints now, there are still a couple of strong multi-tool style lands that I think we need to talk about. We mentioned Three Tree City earlier. I think it's got some things to prove before I really highly recommend it, but I definitely think it needs to be on our radar. But Fountain Port is a little closer to a sure thing. Still not recommending it at this point, so I guess technically it does have some things to prove, but the fact that you can tap it for colorless mana, the turn you play it, you can pay 2 and tap it, sacrifice a token to draw a card, pay 3 and tap it, pay 1 life, create a 1/1 blue fish creature token, or pay 4 and tap this land to create a treasure token. There's just so much versatility here that this card could very easily find a home in almost every deck we build in Standard for the next 3 years. And for that reason, I am going to be testing it very heavily, and come the end of the season, we'll see how much of this is actual real utility versus how much of this is wishful thinking on my part. And now I want to take a few minutes and go through some of these lower rarity cards that have the potential to be heavy hitters for us budget players. And the first card I want to talk about is Bright Blade Stout, perhaps the first Weasel in Magic the Gathering. And thanks to a recent fever-induced hallucination, I was able to catch up with Pauly Shore and ask him about this card. Pauly, thank you for being here. Thanks for stopping by my hallucination. Always appreciated.
Don't bring me in on this bullshit. Leave me alone. I don't want to deal with that shit.
Oh, come on, Pauly. Don't be that way. You're the Weasel, and this is my fever dream. So tell me, what do you think about the card?
Best. Really? Oh my god.
Wow, so you really think this card could be a big deal for us budget players, huh?
It's gonna be major.
Pauly, I tell you, I don't think I could have said it better myself. Again, thank you for stopping by my hallucination. But when it comes to the Bright Blade, a 2-mana 2/2 is more than reasonable stats. First Strike is always going to be a relevant keyword, and let's face it, lifelink, life gain is going to be a hot topic area for Standard for the foreseeable future. The other white card that I think deserves to be on our radar right now is Dewdrop Cure, a 3-mana sorcery with which you can gift a card and allows you to return up to 2 target creature cards with a mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If the gift was promised, instead return up to 3 target creature cards, each with a mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This has the threat to be a really major swing in any game, and it's the kind of card that threatens to make Power to the People a playable starter deck. Although I'm not entirely convinced just yet, I do think it is well worth keeping an eye on. As we move into blue, let me start by acknowledging that the mono blue control, better known as the Hadi Jin deck, has been a fantastic budget deck for the last 2 years or so. But that having been said, I don't think it's the right time for budget players to start building that deck. If you already have that deck, of course, you want to continue investing in it, keeping it up to date, and there's certainly no reason not to keep playing it. And Bloomburrow looks to have quite a bit to offer. First up, we've got Eddie Merc Crab for a whopping 5 and 2 blue elemental crab creature with 5/5 stats and flash. Now, the interesting thing about this is you can't use this to ambush, block things, despite it having flash, because if it's not your turn, it enters tapped. And that's the one downside on this card. And yes, I did say it costs 7 mana. When it enters the battlefield, tap up to 2 target creatures, so it can give you a significant tempo swing. In addition, it's going to look rather similar to Tolarian Terror, as the spell costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard. So it's very much at home in the Jin deck, much the way Tolarian Terror already found a home there. Additionally, modular spells like Spellgire threaten to keep your hand full of exactly what you need at all times, being both a counter spell as well as card selection and card draw, whatever your particular situation deems at any given moment. We have seen a ton of spells like this starting to fill the lower rarities for blue over the last year, and really it's exactly what this deck needs to stay current. That having been said, of course, there are some cards that are going to rotate out, but when you look at the available modular spells like this, I don't think this deck really loses as much as you initially think it does on paper. Just in case nobody has told you up to this point, rats are going to be a thing in Constructed as well as Bloomburrow Limited for quite some time. And a card like Persistent Marchstalker was bound to come around. 2 mana, 3/1 Rat Berserker, if you can believe it. It gets +1/+0 for each other rat you control. And if you haven't looked around, there's a lot of rats. Its threshold mechanic is really going to allow it to function more like a removal spell. You see a 3/1, no matter how big that power gets, its toughness of 1 means it dies to everything. But it is going to be able to be recurred back to the battlefield for just 2 mana and a black. And again, that's going to allow you to swing with it over and over and over again, theoretically about every other turn. And they're going to have to block this with something. That also means that a lot of your other smaller rats might be getting through for combat as well. Next up in red, Rabid Gnaw is very literally the most bite spell we've ever seen, certainly in red and certainly in the arena era of Magic. For 2 mana at instant speed, target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Then it deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. And let's not forget, Valiant is a thing, both in Limited and in Standard, for the next 3 years. This is one of those cards you are going to get tired of seeing, but not when it's in your hand. Galewind Moose is one of those solid green uncommon creatures that is going to see a lot of play at your local pre-releases and over the next couple of years in Standard. Despite its 6 mana casting cost, it comes with impressive on-rate stats of 6/6, Flash, Vigilance, Reach, Trample. I mean, this guy does everything but summon a squirrel token, which is a good thing, because if it did, it would probably gift your opponent a copy of Boris and Natasha tokens to deal with moose and squirrel. The last heavy hitter that I want to draw attention to is green's new combat trick, Overprotect. For 2 mana at instant speed, target creature you control gets +3/+3, trample, hexproof, and indestructible. I mean, this card comes pretty close to doing it all, and it's going to do work for you on both sides of the red zone. The final single card to talk about, and the closest thing that this set has to a lower rarity build around, is the gift-loving Jolly Gerbils. It's a 2 mana 2/3 hamster citizen. When was the last time you saw that? And whenever you give a gift, draw a card. So it turns that potential disadvantage into an advantage. Sadly, despite the gift mechanic having no less than 15 lower rarity cards to choose from, many of which deal with our opponent's threat, the gift mechanic does not have a creature that reacts when you give gifts, like something that would get bigger or more aggressive or something like that, or really any creature that cares about giving gifts, although some do enable gift giving. With that having been said, that means we don't have a win condition for this potential deck. We would have to look outside the gift idea, the gift exchange, if you would, in order to find a win condition. So it's not completely out of the question, but its absence here, as well as the fact that gift is not likely to be reused anytime in the next year. This one may be more of a pipe dream than an actual reality. Alright guys, so this year's budget skeleton, so to speak, is based on 2 very simple, clear-cut concepts. First of all, our time is important, and we probably don't have 8 hours a day to play this game. Even as a content creator, I am pretty limited in the amount of time that I can spend playing this game, so I only have to assume that other people are the same way. And that assumption seems to be pretty clear-cut and well supported within the community. Secondly, the idea that people play standard. It may not be everyone's format, but the overwhelming majority of people on Arena are playing standard the most. This has been recently supported over the last year by our own community's response to those direct to eternal releases, that being the Khans of Tarkir re-release, and of course more recently Modern Horizons 3. Interest in those was, well, not nearly as supported, so those 2 facts are going to be reflected in this budget. So in order to preserve everyone's time and effort when it comes to Arena, the budget is based on getting just 2 wins a day and averaging 1 quest completion per day. Now, I find that I can generally do that in about 10 minutes on average. Oftentimes even less if luck happens to be with you. Sometimes a little bit more, obviously, if I'm doing a draft or something like that. But it all averages out to being a pretty insubstantial amount of time for me personally. Now that gives you roughly 380,000 gold on an average year of 365 days. And when we divide that across the 5 expected standard releases for this year, you get roughly 86,000 gold per set. And I have found that the best way to spend those resources each set is for 5 jump-in events, 5 quick draft events, the purchase of the 45-pack bundle, 1 daily deal for gems, as well as the daily deal draft token. And that's going to bring you in pretty much spot on to total spending. Of course, if the way you play the game doesn't necessarily match this, you can visit my Patreon and find my daily play budget tools to help you find the right balance that works for you. Following my plan puts you pretty effortlessly into 2 premium draft tokens per season. One you get from the Mastery Pass, the other from that previously mentioned daily deal option. I believe that the best way to do this is to use one of those tokens each season for a premium draft of that season's newest set, and then reserve your second draft token for those occasional direct-to-eternal formats so you can still experience them without them needing to be a focus. But man, how do you afford the Mastery Pass? That wasn't listed in the budget at all. Well, actually, it kind of was, because we're doing those 5 quick drafts as well as using one of those premium draft tokens, giving you a total of 6 or 7 drafts per season. When you break down the actual cost of the Mastery Pass, that means you only need to average between 250 and 300 gems per draft in order to completely pay for the Mastery Pass each and every season once you have started that cycle. I know that can sound like a lot of wins to some people that maybe aren't experienced in draft or don't feel like they're good at it, but honestly the best thing you can do is continue to practice, continue to draft. It's not very hard. You will get there eventually, I promise. Now, there are a couple of wild cards to consider this time around for the Bloomburrow budget. First and foremost, Foundations is coming. November is going to be here before you know it. And of course, when it is here, that's going to make major changes to our budgetary plan moving forward. But it doesn't mean that we can't kind of anticipate that and make some decisions now for that. Meaning you might want to set part of this season and Duskmore season's budget aside with plans to get invested in Foundations when it comes out. Now, of course, the question is, how much? Well, the fact is, the answer to that is going to be highly subjective, but there are a couple things for you to think about. First off, this season, renewing accounts, meaning you were around last year, are getting a number of rewards. Most important to this point is 2 jump-in tokens, which could very easily save you 2,000 gold out of this season's budget to be put forth, well, wherever you may choose. The second easy thing, in my opinion, to think about are those 45-pack bundles. See, the only reason I recommend the 45-pack purchase is because you get a slight incentive with the inclusion of an extra free rare and the cosmetic version of it. But let's face it, some seasons it's not a very good rare or cosmetic, so it's really not much of an incentive. And in those cases, it's pretty easy to split up this 45,000 gold, some for Bloomburrow and some not. So there it is, guys. Those are my thoughts on the set as a whole, the individual cards, and the budget dilemmas presented by Bloomburrow and the coming year. But now that you know what I think, I want to know what you think. Drop me a comment down below and let me know how you plan to interact with Bloomburrow. And before we go, of course, I always want to thank my entire Patreon community for supporting not just my passion, but the community at large. And in particular, this time around, I wanted to recognize Searing Blaze and Kenny F. They are coming up on their 1-year anniversary of support. Thank you all. Thank you guys. I could not do this without you. And of course, let me leave you with some suggestions for your next step here on the channel.